I've been having a conversation on X with a Baptist minister who did a very good job of explaining what happened in early Christianity. And that is that before Constantine, early Christians were more spiritual. And after Constantine, they became very materialistic with building effigies, pictures of Christ, and so forth, what you see today in churches. And I thought this is a very good person to start a discussion with about how early Christianity is different than modern Christianity. And what I find interesting is even somebody who can really demonstrate what Rome and the Roman Empire and the Roman emperors themselves did to Christianity, they can't get past the idea that early Christianity was much, much different than modern Christianity. And that is that these rulers twisted the young Christianity into a political tool and expecting that what comes out the other side has any reflection on what the original teachings were, what the original practices were that this minister was talking about happened in early Christianity. And, I'd like to take three different examples of different key people in history to demonstrate how power and how empires deal with those who speak the truth. I'll start with Socrates. Socrates was not his original name. Socrates was a sculptor. He learned the craft of his father. But in his later life, as a philosopher, he spoke out against the sophisticates in the society. And he was given the title of Socrates, which is uncovering the sophisticate language and trying to find the truth. And Socrates was put to death. He was forced to commit suicide because he was corrupting young people's minds. He was teaching them how to uncover the lies of the ruling parties. And what happened in Athens at the time was that the rulers moved from a true democracy to where the pagans became the rulers of the city. And what they did, instead of allowing free religions like the earlier democracy, they forced everybody in Athens to pay homage to their pagan gods. And Socrates didn't want to do that. He didn't want to bow to the pagan rituals. And that's why they put him to death, because he wouldn't follow the rules of the new democracy, which was no longer a democracy. It didn't allow freedom of thought and freedom of speech and freedom of religion as it once had. But after he committed suicide, they didn't stop there. They continued to degrade his reputation. The images that they created of Socrates looked like a dumb drunkard instead of the philosopher that he was, a very intelligent and very adept speaker. And that's what these authoritarian societies do, is they kill the truth and they make sure that nobody wants to go near it again. The same sort of thing happened to Jesus. Jesus was accused by the Jews to being a king of the Jews. And the leaders of the religion were concerned about him taking over their power structure. So he was put to death, but yet he was not ever saying that he wanted to be king on earth. He said that his kingdom is in heaven. And he was no physical threat to anybody. But the truths that he spoke were a threat to the power structure at the time. And then, of course, after his death, you had the likes of Constantine and Justinian in the Roman Empire who got rid of the loving, caring messages that Jesus spoke and turned those messages into something as a political tool to rule over humanity. And then there was Origen of Alexandria, who was born in the 2nd century and lived through the 3rd century. He was the greatest, most prolific biblical scholar who has ever lived. He is the only biblical scholar who bothered to do a phrase-by-phrase, line-by-line comparison of the major Old Testaments of his time. He laid them out 5 across: the Aramaic, the Hebrew, the Greek, Old Testaments, and was able to find errors and omissions across the various translations. And with this knowledge, he then started commenting on the New Testament, on the Gospels, on the letters. Over 50 years, he published over 6,000 works explaining the Word of God, the Word of Jesus, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and using scientific methods in order to do that. There's been no biblical scholar that has ever been so prolific as Origen. He produced more work than what St. Jerome said he could read in a lifetime. But what happened to that work? It was the Emperor Constantine, 300 years after Origen's death, that he declared Origen a heretic. And having done that, the vast majority of his works were destroyed. Very little is left from the 6,000 works that he created that was written in his own hand. And so today, people have varying thoughts about Origen. What I think is the most important is that he was so important to the church that, yes, they call him a heretic, but they couldn't destroy all of his works because all of his works were so beautiful and they needed to keep them in the church. So they transcribed his Greek writings into Latin. And his teachings are still in the church today, but he's a heretic. So what's the point? The point is that in these 3 cases, we can't really understand these characters unless we do a 360-degree view of them, to hear what their contemporaries spoke about them, to try and understand their original messages, And look at what their enemies said against them. For Origen, fortunately for us, Justinian declared 12 of his teachings anathema. And so we know exactly what Origen taught because it's there in Justinian's declaration. For Jesus, it's harder. Jesus, he was not understood by his disciples. They didn't understand the difference between him and God. They didn't really understand the message that he was bringing. And that's why he told them that what he has to say is unbearable. And he would send the Spirit of truth to teach all the truth. That's the promise that Origen brought. He did explain all the truth. And the truth is much, much different than what's being taught in Christianity today. The truth is in harmony with what Socrates taught, what Platonism taught about the material world and the spiritual world, about what Jesus taught, and about what Origen taught. And it's not being taught today. So opening up the door to a window before Constantine is very important. Let's go back and look at what these early Christians did. The most important biblical scholar lived in that time. So why don't we go and take a look at him? I wanted to finish with the symbolism that I use in my book and is on the Pantheon in Athens, Greece. It is two buildings built side by side up on the hill. Both were built to the same God. The small building was built by the enlightened Greeks. It was built in reverence to the women who supported the city while the men were out defending it from the Persian invaders, with 6 women holding up the roof of the building. The large monstrosity was built by the pagan culture, which is something that they've done time and time again, is build enormous structures to their gods, whether it's the pyramids or the structures in Greece, the Colosseums. They were built to display power instead of displaying beauty and reverence. And that's what you see happening in early Christianity when the Roman emperors took control of Christianity and built all these ornate churches throughout the world to their materialistic pagan god.